I'm going to just briefly introduce Jeff. We appreciate Jeff. He's been a long time Stukent user. He's the co-author of our leading textbook, Digital Marketing Essentials, and he's played a really big role in helping Stukent, helping us get to where we are today with our curriculum. He took you could say a risk on us about five and a half years ago on a no-name company out of Rexburg, Idaho. And we appreciate his support and everything he's done for the Stukent community over the last 5 years. Jeff's a BYU educator, teaches marketing down there in Utah at the Marriott School of Business. We're excited to learn from Jeff. He's going to talk to us today about paid search ads, a very common, frequent topic that's being taught in digital marketing, but can be tricky, especially if you're new to digital and haven't really done paid search. So we're excited to hear from Jeff. Jeff, take it away.
Good morning, everybody, or good afternoon and evening to those of you in UK and India. Thanks for tuning in. The title of my talk actually makes me think of a joke by the comedian Mitch Hedberg, who talked about watching a late night infomercial that was said, this product can be yours for 4 easy payments of $19.95. And he says, I want the product that comes with 3 easy payments and 1 really complicated payment. And so I feel like a more appropriate title might be How to Teach Paid Search Ads in 2 easy steps and 2 really complicated steps. But hopefully after my talk today, you will those 2 complicated steps will be also easy for you. So here's the 4 steps that I recommend going through when teaching how to set up paid search ads. First is provide students a template for putting their keywords, deciding on their keywords, as well as writing their ad copy. If they're doing that in the platform, it can be a little bit overwhelming. So I want them to have their ads set up as well as their keywords selected before they go into the platform. And then from there, we're going to go into the Google Ads platform and choose all of the settings. There are dozens of different settings we need to go through so the students understand what exactly they're choosing, what they're selecting for their ad to show up. And then finally, part of those settings is the Google automation. There's a ton of Google automation that Google almost forces you to use. So we want students to understand what is that automation doing. And after we explain that Google automation, then we are going to go ahead and plug in our ads and do some critiquing on the ads themselves. So those are the 4 easy steps, or the 2 complicated and 2 easy steps. So as far as the template goes, this is the template I give my students. If you look at this Excel spreadsheet, you'll see that there's 3 tabs at the bottom, Campaign 1, Campaign 2, and then another tab that says Rename these tabs, so they can name their campaigns. Then we have, in each campaign tab, there's a space for 3 different ad groups, about 10 keywords for every ad group, and then I cue them in to create 2 different ads for every ad group. We talk a lot in digital marketing about the importance of testing, and to do those tests so we know what is working best, but students don't naturally do that testing unless we clue them in. And I think the easiest A/B test to run in all of digital marketing is an A/B test on your paid search ads. All you have to do is create a second ad within the same ad group, and you've got an A/B test automatically running, and Google takes care of the entire A/B test for you. So I try to clue them in on that with this paid search setup. Another thing with this template to think about is, do you tell your students to fill out the entire template or just fill out what is appropriate? I had a group that was selling, and this is the example we're going to be using for today, is a group from a couple years ago was selling a clip-on battery pack for a MacBook. And so when they were trying to fill out the sheet, it was really difficult. Their website only sold that one product. So to come up with 90 different keywords that might be searching for, that might be something related to this clip-on battery pack that's kind of a unique product, was really tough. It ended up being a really good exercise for them. It made them get really creative on what kind of searches people might be doing. But in the end, we decided they should probably just run 1 or 2 of those ad groups and that keyword list. Another comment about this particular semester, just a couple weeks ago, I actually did something different. Instead of having them fill out this entire template before we went through the exercise of setting up the ads, I actually had them come up with a SCAG, and that is a single keyword ad group. The reason for that is I wanted to teach them the setup of the ads before this assignment was due. This assignment was due probably 2 weeks after I wanted to, in class, go through the setup process with them. And so I just gave them 15 minutes at the end of class to decide on what is the single most valuable keyword they anticipated for their ad groups. And then we decided to create an ad copy and an ad group all around that single keyword so that the next class we could go through the setup exercise. So as I mentioned, there was a group that was selling this Sela Power, this clip-on MacBook case, and this is one of the campaigns they came up with. If you notice, one of the things they'll do is you can see some errors on here, and we can go through those after we do the setup process, some typos, as well as some of these fields are going over the character limit in the ads, but we can get through that when we go through the ad setup later. This was the product. As I mentioned, it was a clip-on battery pack. You can kind of see it just clips onto the MacBook and then extends your battery life. So that's the example we're going to be using from one of my students a couple years ago. So that's the first step. Have them fill out that template. What I do is then have one of the groups who come up with that template filled out, and then we go through the setup process. We go log into my Google Ads profile, my Google Ads profile on Google, and then we go through the setup process. So the first page, they're just going to choose what are you doing. For most of my groups, as they are trying to get sales, and then we're going to go on the search campaign, and then they're going to plug in what is the URL of their website. So that's usually pretty straightforward. If they're going for leads and phone calls, that's going to be a little more difficult, but typically if it's sales, that's pretty straightforward. From here, we're going to move on to the ad settings. They're going to choose their campaign name and then choose whether they're just going to be doing search or they're going to be doing both search and display. I think a lot of students figure, well, if I'm going to run the search campaign, if Google can show this across the display network and I can get more traffic, why not? Let's go ahead and keep that active. I actually actively encourage them not to show their ads on the display network. If we're going to run a display campaign, let's run a display campaign and choose those settings and be very strategic about that instead of just doing this sort of sloppy seconds add-on display campaign. So we're going to unclick the display network and focus on the search network. If you notice at the bottom there, it says show more settings. As we go through this exercise, I'm going to encourage them to click on every possible setting to make sure they know what's going on. There are a lot of default settings we're going to keep from Google's default settings. Some of them are going to change, but we need to know what those are. So when we click on that show more settings, we see 3 different possible settings we can change here. One is the start and end dates. And for most campaigns, we're just going to run the campaign and keep monitoring ourselves. We don't need to set an end date, but if we're going to run a Black Friday campaign, maybe we want to make sure that campaign ends after Black Friday so we can set an end date. That's one possible setting. We have the campaign URL options. Those are technical issues with tracking. If you have some kind of fancy analytics setup, you can make the settings change there. We're not going to do that with our students. And then finally, we have dynamic search ad settings where Google can come up with ad copy and optimize that ad copy over time using their algorithms. We're going to go ahead and not use that. Most students are not going to have enough data and enough keywords running and enough history to actually make that worthwhile. So we're going to go ahead and skip that. We're not going to change any of those default settings, but students should be aware of those. From there, we're going to go on to locations, and this is one of the key settings we need to make sure students are aware of because it's sort of a sneaky default setting that Google puts on there that wastes their money. So for this particular example, they're selling the Sela Power case that ships all over the United States, so they're just going to mark the location being the United States. If it doesn't ship to Alaska and Hawaii, they're going to enter those as excluded locations. But otherwise, they'll just leave United States as the location. And if they go to location options and click on that drop-down expansion, you see that the default setting is we're going to target people in or who show interest in your targeted locations. So what does that mean? That means somebody anywhere in the world who has done a search that shows some interest in the United States will be exposed to our ads, despite the fact that we have no way to ship our product to them. And so if you don't change the setting, what you'll notice is if you do your breakdown of traffic by region, you'll find a bunch of clicks from other countries, and that of course is wasted money. So we want to change that setting to people in or regularly in your targeted location. I've had a few groups who actually it did make sense to keep this default setting. There was a group that was selling charter fishing packages in Maui, Hawaii, and so that group, it did make sense to go ahead and leave the default setting as people who are interested in your targeted locations. If they're doing a search for Maui, Hawaii, then it makes sense to go ahead and show my ad to them, even if they are in Oklahoma at the time. So we want to make sure students understand that setting, and then if they're going to exclude Alaska and Hawaii for shipping purposes, they want to change that to people in your excluded location. Okay, moving on, we get into the ad settings of languages. I've only had one group in the past who was targeting specifically the Latin population within the state for a car dealership. In that case, it made sense to change their language, of course, to Spanish, but I encourage them to make sure they don't try to do both languages within the same campaign. You want to make sure you're doing a separate language campaign. I'm going to quickly change my blinds here so I don't get those lines going in here. All right, the audiences one. This is a really interesting one. This has only popped up in the last year or two that you can select audiences for search ads. If you've been doing display ads, you're familiar with the audiences feature of the Google Ads platform, where you can choose based on if they are in market for a particular product or if their browsing history indicates some interests. You will target display ads based on those interests. For the first 15 to 17 years of Google's existence, we have trusted that somebody's search query is the best possible indicator of their interests and of their purchase intention. And so we never had audiences layered on top of the search. If somebody searched for an external battery for a MacBook, we think that is the strongest possible signal they are interested in our product. We're going to advertise to them. Here, Google says, let's say if you have some marketing research or some evidence from past history that not only is somebody who does a search for a MacBook clip-on battery case somebody a good target, but also if somebody who's, let's say, outdoorsy, if they're an outdoor enthusiast, those people for some reason convert at a much higher rate than the non-outdoor enthusiasts. Here we can actually add on interest activity of being an outdoor enthusiast, and then we can bid higher for those people and signal to Google that those people are more valuable to us. We're willing to spend more per click on those searchers than people who are not outdoor enthusiasts. This is a recent feature of the Google Ads platform, not one I've actually used and have a lot of experience with, and I haven't actually talked to very many people in industry who talk about this yet. And so I don't know, the jury's still out on whether this is a particularly beneficial feature or something we can skip, so I will encourage my students to skip it. Something also worth discussing is how you utilize this audience. Is you can either increase your bid, which is the default setting, and observation as you see there. If they select an audience from the audiences feature, you can bid more or less for that audience, or you can actually limit the targeting. You say, hey, if somebody does a search for an external battery, clip-on battery for a MacBook, I only want to show it to them if they are outdoor enthusiasts, but not if they are not outdoor enthusiasts. So that's a new feature within the last couple of years on the Google Ads platform. Not one I encourage my students to take advantage of right away. Maybe they want to do some experimentation with it, but so far the jury's still out on whether that's particularly useful for most campaigns. From there, we're going to be moving on to budget and bidding, and this is where it gets quite interesting. So the budget, you tell Google, here's my daily spending limit, and if you tell them, hey, I don't want to spend more than $100 in a day, Google says, great, thanks for telling us. We will spend no more than $200 in a day. If you read the fine print on the right, they'll spend as much as twice as much as your daily spending limit, but they say, we will not spend more than $3,000 in a month because you're $100 spending limit per day. So if there's a particularly high volume search day, they will spend more than your limit. Just make students aware of that. And then we get into bidding, and this is why I find this interesting, is this is what has changed most frequently over the years, is that bidding used to be you set your bid, and that was your bid for every keyword, or you could have a default ad group bid, and that was the bid. Nowadays, you actually don't even need to set a bid at all. All you do is say, here's what I want you to focus on, get me as many conversions as you can for the $100 a day I'm spending. Or you can select that bid strategy directly. So here's some of the options. If you go down to click on that conversions, there's 4 different options. You can focus on conversions, conversion value, maximizing clicks, just maximizing traffic of any kind, or maximizing your impression share. If you go on to that choose a bid strategy directly, there's a few more options. You can do a target CPA, a target return on ad spend, or you can do the manual cost per click. So the manual cost per click is squirreled away there, hard to find. That was the setting for a number of years. That's how we always did paid search campaigns. We set manual cost per click bids, and now you actually have to go hunting for it if you want to do the manual bid strategy. So how does this maximize conversions if you don't even have to set a bid? How does this work? Well, that's what I'm going to walk through. That's step 3 of the 4 easy steps. This is the second complicated step. The first complicated step was all these different settings, and now we're going to talk to our students about how does this automation work. So I'm going to give you a few examples. One of the settings is also the set a target cost per action. It was part of the explanation. I'm going to tell you why that's usually not a good idea to set at your target cost per action. Or cost per acquisition, I guess. Cost per action is the Facebook term. Cost per acquisition is the Google CPA. All right. So on Google Automation, I've given you these 4 keywords. This is the daily search volume as well as the cost that it would be to rank in number 1 or number 4 position. And I want to walk through what is the automation going to do for us. Well, to know what that automation is going to do, we need to know more than just the cost per click and the daily search volume. We also need to know, I have some, okay, I actually wasn't aware of this. So I have some dynamic things in these slides. I don't know how to go through the dynamic. I need to remove some of these white boxes covering more of that information there. Sorry about that, team. Stukent, I didn't realize on this feature I only have the ability to advance the slide, not to actually do some of the dynamic slide settings there. On this slide, there's also the cost per click information as well as the conversion rate and the average order value. So I'm hoping the team can make those dynamic settings move along. Otherwise, we won't be able to see the rest of that information. I can tell you the
Hey, Jeff.
Yeah.
Yeah, we won't be able to do that, but in the follow-up on the presentation, they'll be able to see it when we hand it out.
Okay, so I can. The key information I want to share with you is that the top keyword, best external battery pack, has a conversion rate of 4.5%. The second keyword has a conversion rate of 6%, and the second 2 and the last 2 keywords have a conversion rate somewhere around 1%. So the conversion rate is much better for those first 2 keywords. And the average order value is pretty similar, about $140, $160 for those keywords. So that's what I was going to share. On the next slide, I have, so if we were to do manual bids, this would be the result. So let's say we do set those manual bids so that we're going to rank somewhere around position 3 for most of those searches. We're going to end up with a particular click-through rate and the cost per click. We would end up with more clicks for the third keyword. You can see the results there. We'd end up spending almost $400 a day. But if we set our daily budget to $100, on average, we're going to end up with a long-term impression share of only 27%. So only 1 of 4 searches is Google even going to show our ad because of our budget limit there. All right, so those are the manual bidding results. But once we set those bids, because of that impression share being brought down, we will have our clicks spread across those different keywords, and that's how much we would spend a day. We'd just be spending the $100. As a result of that, we would have revenue of about $100 and with conversions of about less than 1 conversion per day. So how do you get a fractional conversion? This is long-term averages in expectation based on our bids. This is the results we would expect. Okay, so what does the automation do for us? So Google likes to make, if you were at ProfCon, there was a speaker from Google who said, we use 3 million signals for optimizing your campaigns. I would say that 3 million number is just a nonsense number. They can count things however they want. And it also makes the process seem more opaque and less understandable what is actually happening. It's a little more clear if you just break it down into 2 different dimensions on which they're automating. Number 1 is they're going to shift budget to the keywords that are producing more conversions. So this is an as-if model of, okay, if we put all $100 toward that best external battery pack, at the current bid of $7, we'd only be able to get 15 clicks in a day, which would lead to 0.67 conversions. 15 clicks times a conversion rate of 4.5%, we'd get about 2/3 of a conversion every day and on expectation. The second keyword, if we put all $100 towards that second keyword at a bid of $5, we'd get about 20 clicks and we'd get more than one conversion per day because of our 6% conversion rate. Same exercise across the keywords. It makes sense to put all of our budget first to that second keyword. So that's what Google would do. As it learned the conversion rate and figured out that that second keyword had a much higher conversion rate, it would shift budget to that second keyword. The second dimension on which it's going to be optimizing is it's going to shift the bid amount so that you get an ad rank that spends your money the most efficiently. So if you bid the right amount to make all of your keywords come in rank number 1, you're going to spend more money, which means less clicks, fewer clicks, and fewer conversions. But if you lower the bid a lot enough to end up in position number 4, we're going to end up with more clicks because they're going to cost less, and we end up with more conversion. So it makes more sense for us to rank in position number 4 than in position number 1, in which case we're going to send all of our money to that second keyword in position number 4. Unfortunately, what happens is there's not enough search volume to spend all of your $100 on that second keyword. So we're going to be in position number 4 and put as much money as we can to that second keyword, but then we're going to have money left over, so we're going to put that money to the second best keyword, which was the best external battery pack keyword. Spend the rest of the money on that keyword. We're going to end up with about a conversion per day, and then we'll have revenue of $134. So you see that this automation has improved our return on ad spend by 34%. So that's how I like to explain this automation in Google. If you set to maximize conversions with a $30 target CPA, what is Google going to do? It's going to convert that CPA bid into a cost per click bid. So you multiply that cost per acquisition bid by the conversion rate. We're going to end up with a cost per click bid equivalent of less than $2 for all those keywords, and only 30 cents and 24 cents for the third and fourth keyword, which all of those bids are going to be too low to even rank on the first page. So I tell students to be very careful about CPA bids. They often just lead to no volume at all. Finally, what about if you're maximizing conversion value? What's Google going to look at there? It's not going to look at just the conversion, but it's going to look at the conversion amount. What this does is put a really high stress on making sure that the students have their analytics set up properly and they're passing along not only the correct conversion, but also the conversion amount. That usually requires some technical prowess, so I tell students to avoid this because usually the conversion value is not being passed on properly. It takes some serious technical skill to do that. But what it's going to do is, again, instead of evaluating on the number of conversions we have, it's going to evaluate on what is your return on ad spend. So it turns out in this particular case, the second keyword is the best one, followed by the first keyword, which is the same result as conversions. That is not always the case. That is the case if the average order value is similar across those keywords, but it might be the case that some keywords yield much higher transaction values, in which case the return on ad spend could give you different results than letting them automate for conversions. So the results would be the same. We would put all of our money towards that second keyword, spend all we could on that one as it is the best keyword, gives the highest return on ad spend, and then we'd move the rest of the budget to the first keyword and get the same results we did on conversions. The one thing I really want to warn my students about is if we do maximize clicks. So if they do maximize clicks, where is it going to spend all your budget? It's going to spend all your budget on the whatever keyword gives you the cheapest click, which was that third keyword, I believe, had the cheapest clicks. So it's going to spend all the money it can on that third keyword. Then it's going to go to that fourth keyword, was the second cheapest, and then it's going to spend the rest of the money on that third keyword. You see there the actual costs, what it can spend in a given day based on the volume and the bid amounts. So our number of clicks in a day is going to go up to 60. Before, we had about 20 clicks to give us that one conversion in a day. We're going to triple the number of clicks we're going to get. We're going to triple our traffic, which sounds good, except that all that traffic is coming from the lowest value keywords. And the reason they are the lowest value is because they don't yield conversions. And so we're going to end up spending all of our money on traffic that doesn't convert, and we're going to actually lose money on that. So that's the one thing I really want to warn students about is maximizing clicks is usually not a good goal, because what's Google going to do? It's going to find the cheapest keywords, and usually the reason they're cheap is because they bring in poor traffic. So one other thing, some notes about this automation. So I'm done with the explanation of how the automation works. I try to explain it in terms of those two dimensions. It's going to shift budget to the keywords that produce more conversions, and it's going to shift the bid amounts so that you get the most efficient clicks possible. So it sounds like a great thing, and it is a great thing if you have sufficient volume for Google to do this, to automate and to optimize on this. If you talk to people in the industry, if they're working for clients, we're spending basically less than $1 million a month on AdWords or on Google on paid search ads. Usually there's just not enough data for Google to optimize on these dimensions because they can't calculate your conversion rate at sufficient sufficiently granular level to know that one keyword produces a much better conversion rate than another. And so I have worked with advertisers who do use this automation. They do spend millions of dollars a month on Google, and it works great because there's an optimization period where it's trying to figure out what's the best thing to do, and for that time you're wasting a lot of money trying to figure out what are the dimensions on which it needs to optimize. And then it starts to optimize that and figure out what are those metrics behind it, and then it starts to perform really well. But those are for advertisers who are spending literally millions of dollars on Google search. If you're spending less than that, then typically it's going to take too long to optimize and to figure out what are the right metrics there, and as a result, it's going to end up costing you money. So I encourage students to just go ahead and do manual bids, especially if they're only spending $100, $200 for their campaign for the class. Okay, from there, there's a few more settings we want to look at. Some of these are kind of technical. The conversions, are we using the conversions from our analytics that we've already got set up, or are we going to choose particular conversions for our campaign? If we have different lead conversions versus purchase conversions, we want to set those up. We can schedule different ads to show up during different times of the day. And then the ad rotation is an interesting one. If we set up two ads within the same ad group, it's going to run an A/B test. And we can say, hey, we will choose the ad that's working better. We'll come back and monitor that. And once we get one ad seems to be working better than the other, we will go ahead and do that. That's the do not optimize, rotate ads indefinitely. Or we can trust Google and say, you start to favor the ad that performs better. It uses something like a multi-arm bandit algorithm. If you're not familiar with a multi-arm bandit, look it up. It's kind of interesting. But basically, Google will start to favor the ad that it sees performing better. I recommend students go ahead and optimize. Google sees more information about what ad is performing better, and Google is pretty trustworthy on that dimension. As far as ad extensions, the one thing I tell my students about ad extensions is yes. Run all the site link, call out extensions, all the extensions you possibly can. The call extension they're not going to do unless they're actually taking phone calls. But all the other extensions, make sure to get those set up. They're a lot of work to set up, optimize, figure out what are the best extensions, create your, basically it's additional ad copy. And they need to do those things. Most students are going to be lazy and not bother with those, but the extensions can only help them. So I try to push them, run all the extensions you can, go ahead and put in the work for those. And finally, we go ahead and put in our keywords. Most of the time, after they've done that template, they're going to have all their keywords. They're going to paste their keywords. And then we say, all right, what kind of keywords are you using here? They're using broad match keywords. Let's update those. Let's make use either broad match or phrase match or exact match. Broad match is going to give them a lot of really garbage search terms. So they should understand that. Finally, they're going to plug in their ad copy. Most of them will have some violations of the character limit as they do that. And so we're going to go through that and see that. Another mistake I see is students want to fill in both paths of the URL because they think two paths is better than one. That's not necessarily the case. It's particularly for the example we're looking at. It's an external battery. The point of the path is to communicate to your searchers where are they going to be going in the website. It's not really space for extra ad copy. So you don't. You can warn students they don't need to fill in both paths. That's not, having two paths is not always better than one. So that is the 4 steps. We have given them the template. They come with that template. We go through the settings on Google Ads. We explain how this Google automation is going to work. And most of the time, we tell them, all right, here's how the automation works. Probably don't use it. Let's do manual cost per click because we're going to be better. Our instincts are going to be better than this algorithm that's going to take a long time to optimize. And then we run through the ad and we can talk about whether they have unique value proposition and the ad copy itself, as well as making sure those advertisements and the ad copy fits with with the character limits and the specifications that are required by Google. So those are the 4 steps, 2 easy steps and 2 complicated steps. Hopefully those complicated steps are now easy for you to explain to your students. All right, I think my time is up. I think we've got just a couple of minutes for questions. Is that right, Trevor?
Yes. Hey, thanks a lot, Jeff. So we do have some questions in the queue. As a reminder, if you do have questions for Jeff specifically about his templates, and these 4 steps, just chat them in real quick and we'll try and get to them. With any of our Q&A, if we have to cut the Q&A, we do have all of them being logged, and so we will address those off the webinar. So Jeff, first question, give us some ideas on how you come up with the product. A lot of the professors and teachers on here are new, and so give us some ideas on how you get students to actually get something that they can sell.
Yeah, so in my class, I do a semester-long project. Within the first 3 weeks, I make students choose a project, a website they're going to be working on throughout the semester. And I have had clients, it's pretty common if somebody finds out you teach digital marketing, they're going to say, hey, you know what? I've got a website. I'd like some students to work on it. I'd like some free work from students. But actually, typically, my students come up with a project themselves. So I do get some clients coming, and I make those projects available for students. But when I tell students you have to run a website for a month and run some ad campaigns for it, do some SEO for it, do some redesign of the website, most of the students either have a relative or they themselves are trying to set up a business, and so they have a business idea they want to do. So most of the students choose their own project and their own website to optimize.
Another question to follow up there, where do you get funding for these? Is it typically, if they do go to a relative, does the relative just hopefully invest in that student and chalk it up as a test?
Yeah, I tell students, if they can get the client to pay for it, they should. I tell them I want them to have $100 available for the Google Ads campaign, which certainly isn't not enough to get enough data where they feel like they're really good at paid search at the end of just spending $100. So I try to get them to have their client put that money up. If they've got a client, if it's their own website, then hey, it's an investment in marketing. So put that money together. If all else fails, the students will pool their money, put the $100 up. However, I do tell the students it's not a requirement to spend $100, just make that available. Some of them are working on projects where the search volume is really low and they can't spend $100, and if they get in the mindset, well, I have to spend $100, let's just bid up our clicks to $5 cost per click, that's a really inefficient way to run a paid search campaign. So it's not a requirement to spend $100, just to have the $100 available.
Gotcha. To go along with that question, I know Jeff talked mostly about Google. Stukent, we do have a Bing Ads project that a lot of folks use, and within that project, Bing does offer Stukent users, I believe it's $100 in free ad credit. So if you are struggling to come up with that and want to test out Bing Ads, basically same thing, just different provider. We do have $100 for each of your students that they can use. Is there any way that this project that you involve can be done without cost?
I guess the Bing ads, what you just said, the Bing ads would be the costless way to do it, right?
Yeah, that's the only way. More questions. So how do you find clients? We already talked about that. Let's say they don't have a relative. Have you had anyone had success kind of cold calling or door knocking businesses down there in Provo?
I know another instructor who teaches an entrepreneurship class here at BYU that they do a lot of AdWords, and they encourage students to do on Alibaba. So just try to drop ship, get a drop ship relationship. Of course, then they'll have to pay money for the products, but they can also, what he does, which is I'm not sure I recommend, is he actually has students sell these Alibaba products and then just cancel the orders. And so they'll sell them and then say, oh, sorry, we actually can't ship those orders. I don't necessarily recommend that. That seems a little bit, you're kind of putting some people through the ringer. But if you can sell the products before you secure them from Alibaba, and then it'll just take a long time to ship them, that's another way to do it, where they're just setting up their own website and selling product.
Gotcha. All right. Moving along, how do you calculate the ad budget for the client before setting up the campaign?
That's usually the ad budget itself is a constraint that the client will give. So for my students, usually it's a logical process of, all right, well, if it's our own project, we're only going to spend $100. Here's what the cost per click based on our keyword research is going to cost us. $3 per click. We want to enable at least 3 or 4 clicks in a day. And we want our campaign to run at least a week. In that case, we're going to set our limit to $15 in a day because we only have $100. So that's not really an amount you optimize. It's just an amount you constrain. And so what's the logical constraint for you?
Gotcha. And then about how long do you run the campaign for these clients?
Yeah, I tell students to let the campaign run for at least a week. One of the key skills I want them in AdWords is not really the setup. We're going through the setup process so they understand it, but it's actually understanding the data as it comes in and optimizing the campaign as the data comes in. So I want it to run for a week, and they should be checking it daily, if not multiple times per day, to see, okay, what traffic are we getting? Are we seeing some search terms that are just complete garbage? Let's turn off those or change our keyword settings so we get rid of those garbage keywords, etc.
Great. This might be the last question. Jeff, I think you could probably answer this, where you've been using the Stukent digital marketing curriculum for so long. But as more colleges develop curriculum and degrees in digital marketing, is Stukent developing resources and simulations in paid search and other topics? Do you want to maybe just talk about digital marketing essentials and the bundle with the Mimic Pro PPC simulation?
Yeah, the idea of this exercise is, in my class I use the Mimic Pro simulation, and I've actually been talking to Raphael, who's the product manager for that simulation, and they're continually adding features on that to try to keep up with the changes that Google is making. And I use this exercise to make them understand the Google Ads platform as well as the AdWords setup. But the key skill in terms of understanding the data and what changes they can make to their keywords and the settings to optimize a campaign. As you notice, this keyword is performing well, this is not. How do we shift our budget? All those skills come from the Mimic Pro simulation, which they are constantly adding. And so the setup in terms of the Google Ads platform, they're going to get the skill from just going through this exercise. But the skill of understanding the data and making changes, that comes from the simulation. If you went to ProfCon, you saw how big Stukent is getting, much bigger than when we started off 5 years ago with, I think, the 4 of us at Trevor's parents' cabin. So they're constantly working to keep up to date on that.
Yep. Awesome. All right, I don't see any more questions in the queue, so I think that'll be it. Hey, Jeff, we appreciate your time this morning, afternoon, evening, depending on where we're at. Thank you for sharing the information. We did have a question come in about your template that you use. I believe we will provide that in the webinar notes, which will be emailed out to all attendees and registrants. So, Jeff, thank you so much. Enjoy your weekend.
Thanks all for tuning in.
Yeah, we'll see you later.
See ya.